The doors to the private studio did not just close, they sealed off a decade of absolute, rigid silence. Last week, Catherine, Princess of Wales, sat down in front of a lens and did the one thing the British monarchy actively forbids. The palace communications team had spent days preparing a sanitized, carefully sanded script. She held it in her hands, looked at it for a long, heavy moment, and then placed it face down on the table. Without telling a single aide, without institutional clearance, and without a net, she spoke about her youngest son in her own unscripted words. And 2/3 of the way through, her voice broke. She did not stop. She did not ask to reset the camera. She kept talking through the tears, a sight so rare and unvarnished that it sent shockwaves through the highest corridors of Kensington Palace. Kensington Palace does not do unscripted. It does not do tears. For over 10 years, every single frame, photograph, and statement concerning the 3 Wales children has been calculated, cleared, and released on a strict schedule. That is not a rumor. That was institutional policy. So the question that should haunt every royal observer is not merely what Catherine said. The question is, what horrific emotional pressure pushed a woman that disciplined to shatter a decade of palace protocol on international television? For months, the public had felt the strange, silent shift inside the family. Scheduled appearances were quietly erased. Timetables shifted without explanation. An 8-year-old boy simply vanished from public view. No announcements were promised, and the press office met every urgent inquiry about Prince Louis with the exact same 4 polite, cold words, respect for family privacy. That silence was no administrative accident. Prince William built that wall himself. He fought for it, defended it against his own advisors, and insisted it was the only way to save his children. And then it backfired in the one devastating way nobody in that building ever saw coming. To understand why the system shattered, you have to look at the Saturday in September 1997 that redefined Prince William's entire life. He was 15 years old, walking behind his mother's coffin in a dark suit, while billions watched his private grief get converted into public entertainment. Within 2 weeks, Diana's private letters, clothes, and secret audio tapes were put on display. On that day, William learned a terrifying lesson about what the world does to a royal life once it gets its hands on the details. He spent the next 30 years building an impenetrable fortress around his own children. 3 kids, seen only a handful of times a year, Christmas at Sandringham, a balcony appearance, and carefully staged photographs taken by Catherine herself. A photograph you release is a photograph no paparazzi can profit from. It was the most successful protection system in royal history. But the thing that ultimately broke was not a flaw in his logic. It was his absolute best work turning against him. The crisis reached its boiling point inside a quiet, private rehearsal room at Windsor Castle. It was supposed to be a gentle practice run before an upcoming formal event. No crowds, no cameras, no outside eyes. Halfway through the morning, young Prince Louis stopped walking, looked up, and reached for his mother's hand. Then he asked a question that froze the entire room. He did not ask if he had to go outside. He asked his mother whether he was allowed to be seen. Catherine knelt on the stone floor, took both of his hands, and realized with a sickening wave of shock that she could not think of a single sentence that was both truthful and reassuring. William immediately cleared the room, ordering staff out and sending George and Charlotte away so they wouldn't witness their younger brother asking such a heartbreaking question. That single morning changed the temperature inside the royal household forever. William's immediate reaction was pure protective instinct. He shut down everything. Every engagement involving Louis was instantly canceled. He refused to debate it. To William, a missed ceremony meant nothing compared to an 8-year-old child who had begun to believe he was being hidden away for a reason. But senior palace advisors warned him that complete silence creates a dangerous void. In the world of constitutional royalty, an unfulfilled duty is a matter of public record. Gaps on a master schedule do not stay empty. If the palace does not fill them with truth, the media will fill them with poison. They had seen this exact tragedy play out with Catherine's own health absence months earlier. But William refused to listen. He would not allow his son's fear to become a public talking point. He was right about the danger, but dead wrong about the solution. While William fought to keep the doors locked, the silence spread through the house like frost, seeping directly into the minds of the other two children. 13-year-old Prince George decided it was his duty to absorb the tension quietly. He became careful, still, and hyper-vigilant. Then, late one evening, George turned to his father and asked whether a younger brother could be removed from everything without anyone on the outside knowing. He wasn't asking about royal protocol. He was an elder brother trying to figure out if the silence meant something catastrophic was happening to his family. 11-year-old Princess Charlotte responded differently. She watched every closed door and noticed every voice that dropped when she walked into a room. Without telling her parents, she began writing handwritten jokes on slips of paper and slipping them beside Louis's bed every single night. She had calculated on her own that when Louis laughed, he came back to himself for a moment. An 11-year-old child was quietly carrying out a rescue operation in pencil because the adults around her had stopped explaining the world. Inside their private quarters, William and Catherine were running on parallel tracks of total exhaustion. Both were trying to be the immovable shield for the other, and in doing so, both had stopped speaking the truth out loud. The warmth hadn't died, but it had gone completely silent. The dam finally broke late one night after the children were asleep. Catherine sat down with her husband and pushed 2 sets of papers across the table. One was the official palace draft a masterclass in corporate PR that sanitized the entire ordeal, claiming things were improving without acknowledging a single drop of real human fear. Beside it lay pages written in Catherine's own handwriting. William read her opening lines and shook his head, warning her that a raw public message would be dissected, weaponized, and quoted back to their son for the rest of his life. But Catherine held her ground and delivered a truth that ended the debate on the spot. She told William that Louis had begun to believe he was being kept out of sight because his own family was ashamed of him. Read that again. A decade of hyperprotection had convinced an 8-year-old boy that he was the problem. Catherine pointed out that George was watching every door, that Charlotte was leaving notes by a bedside just to hear her brother laugh, and that the silence was no longer protecting their family, it was destroying it from the inside. Then, she revealed Louis's own private request. The boy didn't want a grand defense. He wanted to thank the people who had kept him safe. He wanted his brother and sister to know their support mattered, and above all, he did not want the world thinking he had hidden away because he wasn't brave enough. Hearing those words, the heir to the British throne put his head in his hands. In a rare, unfiltered admission, William confessed that his rigid insistence on privacy was no longer just about safety. It was driven by his own terrifying fear of losing control over the lives of the people he loved. When the draft reached King Charles, the monarch cleared his office and read his daughter-in-law's handwritten notes twice. When he reached the line about a child mistaking privacy for shame, Charles took off his glasses and sat in absolute silence. Charles had spent his entire life inside an institution that demanded emotional repression at all costs. He had lived through the damage of that policy, watched his own sons suffer under it, and was currently battling cancer in full view of the world. When William entered the room, Charles asked him one devastating question. Does this statement serve Louis, or does it just make the adults feel better? The palace communications team tried one last time to intervene, offering a safer version that stripped out Louis's personal thank you line. King Charles rejected their edit on the spot. He noted that stripping the child's own meaning to protect the crown was the exact mistake the monarchy had been making for 100 years. But Charles added one revolutionary condition. 8-year-old Prince Louis had to hear every single word of the statement read to him, and he was granted full veto power over his own story. Catherine read the final text to her son in private. Louis listened with quiet intensity and corrected exactly one phrase. Catherine had written that he was doing better. Louis stopped her and insisted it be changed to state that he was getting strong again. Doing better is something that happens to you. Getting strong again is an active choice made by someone taking control of their own fate. An 8-year-old child spotted the passive voice that a room full of high-paid royal publicists missed, and he demanded his agency back. King Charles signed off on the edit with a personal handwritten note: "Truth delivered with restraint protects the crown far more honestly than silence." When the video aired, the global reaction was immediate. But within 48 hours, the coverage took the dark turn William had spent months predicting. Television networks built elaborate timelines, matching Louis's missed appearances against chart graphics. Pundits paused old video footage, frame by frame, analyzing a child's facial expressions from 2 summers ago to speculate on his mental state. Sitting in his living room, watching a commentator dissect his 8-year-old son on live television, William reached out his hand toward the screen as if to physically stop it, picked up the remote, and turned it off. Turning to his staff, he uttered 5 quiet, lethal words: "My son is not entertainment." During the worst night of the crisis, Louis had laid awake in the dark, listening to his father break down outside his bedroom door. The 8-year-old had faked sleep, choosing to carry the burden alone rather than let his father know his private grief had been exposed. William pulled his son into a tight embrace, telling him that being brave doesn't mean you're never frightened. It means choosing to speak when staying silent is easier. On August 1st, 2026, Prince William and Catherine brought all 3 of their children to the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow. There were no official press statements, no formal royal arrivals, and no security blockades. They simply walked into the arena as a family, sat in the public stands, and watched the netball semifinals. Prince Louis wore an oversized bucket hat, fist-bumped the game's mascot, and laughed alongside his brother and sister. Before entering the venue, young Louis paused at the entrance for a brief second. Charlotte reached out and took his left hand. George took his right. Catherine did not push him forward or hide his hesitation. She let him pick the moment himself. And together, the 3 children walked into the light. Prince William spent 30 years believing that love meant building walls high enough to keep the world out. He emerged from the storm, realizing that true protection means knowing when to break the silence, listening to the quietest voice in the room, and having the courage to let an 8-year-old boy teach the crown how to be brave.